This is episode 247 of the Rio Grande Foundation's Tipping Point, New Mexico. I'm Paul Gessing.
And I'm Wally Drangmeister.
I'm president of the Rio Grande Foundation, New Mexico's free market think tank. You can find out more about the foundation at riograndefoundation.org. Well, Wally, no shortage of things to talk about since last we spoke. And of course, that was the national election results that just took place. Of course, we're still waiting for some final numbers in various races, and the President Trump has claimed voter fraud and all kinds of different issues and irregularities in the national election, and we're not going to go quite down that rabbit hole. We'll maybe step to the edge and peer down into the rabbit hole, but we're not going into that rabbit hole because there's, quite frankly, too much going on and too many results to look at across the nation and within right here in New Mexico, and other issues unrelated largely to the election. But definitely, anytime you have this kind of big election governed by so many different states and with so many different political issues at play, there is the potential for some issues to be kind of glossed over or to maybe not be handled correctly. And whether it is, allegations of fraud or just ballots not being counted correctly, a lot of allegations. No doubt President Trump's legal team is going to take it to the logical conclusion. The media want to move on. They've declared Joe Biden the president, and they're all too eager to put President Trump in their rearview mirror. But not so fast, and we'll see how this whole situation shakes out.
Yeah, until the College of Electors cast their ballots, and there's still some things to go on before now. It would be an understatement to say that the president has a long road to hoe to retain the presidency, but it's never over till it's over. And in the words of Yogi Berra, and it's not quite over yet, but it's looking like there will be a President Biden, at least at this point, but we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, and just, we're, again, real briefly in the presidential race, the large number of mail-in ballots that were cast, the encouragement, the almost fear of some people to go and cast their ballots in person, even during early voting, really backloaded, if you will, the counting of those ballots. For some reason, you would think that ballots mailed in early would be ready, waiting, and kind of already tabulated, maybe in some deep secret chamber that nobody could let the results out. But
yeah, a bunker under Fort Hills where the nuclear weapons are stored.
Yeah.
So
instead, we wait for those results, and again, politically, because of different approaches to the virus, et cetera, those late arriving or late counted votes wind up going disproportionately for Democrats. So it's not an entire shock. And plus, having not been our first rodeo, Wally, that those big urban areas, big voting blocks tend to be pretty liberal, and they also tend to be by far the slowest in reporting their results. Big cities in Georgia like Atlanta, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, Detroit, Michigan, Philly, Pennsylvania, all of those tend to be really just slower, and they also tend to be pretty blue. And we hope the vote's being tabulated effectively, legally, but that is just a specific issue in our election process.
yeah, no doubt about it. And when New Mexico was in a position where we had a lot of close races, the same sort of thing would happen here. Albuquerque used to be a big problem in that regard. They've done a little better. In terms of close races, there weren't really very many. There was a few state Senate races, or one that was very close, a few others that were pretty close. But for the most part, there wasn't a lot of nail biting on election night, and New Mexico, for better or for worse, did better than we have historically, I think, in terms of getting the votes counted. Also, good to know that we haven't had big indications of fraud here, which is, I think, positive, because I think that's, if you were to look at when they ask people what the thing they dislike the most about the election process is the fact that it might be not on the up and up, really takes people's trust in the process way, way down, which I don't believe is a good thing for a democratic republic like the United States of America.
No doubt. And just kind of running through a little bit, and I concur, the process seemed to go relatively smoothly here in New Mexico, not necessarily with results that would have thrilled either you or I. And we're going to get to kind of recapping our predictions shortly. U.S. Senate right now is very much in the balance. As we speak, it's even Steven. However, there are a couple of runoff elections in Georgia that could determine the fate of of electoral control in the Senate. Of course, if Biden is the president, then theoretically Kamala Harris could be the tie-breaking vote in such in a 50-50 situation, which is the best the Democrats, as I understand it, can ask for. But there's a lot going on in those Senate races. And I think a lot of us conservative libertarian types would sleep a lot better knowing that the Senate is not under Democratic control, and that that would be something to check the Biden-Harris presidency if those, or two runoffs in Georgia go to Republicans. Georgia's traditionally been a conservative state, but I do not envy the folks in Georgia. You think we got hit with campaign ad after campaign ads. I think there's going to be skywriters. Every TV and radio ad will be a campaign ad, and just a lot of resources going into Georgia to fight over control of the U.S. Senate.
Yeah, and then, just a quick point is that if the Republicans have a majority in the Senate, and they stick together, by the way, because there have been quite a few Republicans in the Senate over time that have been, what shall we say, a bit squishy and tended to not have a conservative approach to their votes on legislation. The business community, I think, nationally thinks that's a good thing. The stock market kind of reacted a little negatively when they thought Biden was there, but then when it looked like the Senate was going to be there, they're like, a mixed government where things might be slowed down a little bit, and so we'll have to wait and see if it goes to where both of those seats are Democratic seats, and all three branches are, both houses of the legislature plus the presidency are controlled by the Ds. It'll be similar to what Obama had in his first term, and so we will see what they do with that. So,
yeah, well, that is definitely a scenario, and we're not hoping for that one. But before we bring out the recap of our predictions.
Neither one of us batted 100, did we?
Batted 1,000. 100 is a terrible batting average.
Oh yeah, no, batting 1,000,
Yeah.
100%. There you go. Thank you.
Speaking of the U.S. Senate, though, Mark Ronchetti here in New Mexico ran much closer to Ben Ray Lujan than was expected. I think he wound up losing by about 4 points. And of course, Yvette Harrell contributed to a Republican upsurge in the U.S. House. That was something that really nobody out there saw happening, is that Republicans picked up a number of seats in the House, and that's still a little bit in flux, the exact numbers and how the House is going to look after when 2021, when they convene Congress. But it's the numbers are going to be razor tight. And that's by and large what we predicted. You predicted President Trump would win. I predicted that Biden would win, and right now I look like I may be right, but
Right.
it was
It was close.
Neither of us thought this was going to be a landslide. We both, I think, were correct in saying that President Trump was a lot closer than a lot of the polls led one to believe. In terms of the U.S. Senate race, I went on a little bit of a ledge and picked Ron Keddy. He outperformed, as I just said, but ultimately lost, so I was wrong on that. And then when it came to Congress, we didn't really even discuss it, but like I said, again, the House, U.S. House went more Republican, but it did not go completely Republican. And then the legislature in these races here, New Mexico largely went status quo, which is a big disappointment for Republicans. More of that sorting happened in the Senate, where Albuquerque Republicans lost. And I pointed to that for several months as kind of is this going to be a redux of 2018? Largely it was, although Mark Morris stayed. And then the House.
Mark Morris stands alone in the Albuquerque area as the Republican senator. So
yeah. And the House of Representatives, I think the Republicans picked up a seat or two. So ultimately a wash. Now, it's worth noting that turnout was extremely high. We set a record for overall turnout in New Mexico, but in terms of the number percentage, it was 68.3-ish. And that is a very high turnout by historical standards in New Mexico.
Yes, and I think when the Republicans were hoping to gain a few seats, they were thinking that they had done a good job, and they had, of motivating their base to get out to the polls. The Democrats, though, likewise got their voters out to the polls as well. That's why there's, in record turnout. And so it wasn't disproportionate, I don't believe, largely between the R's and the D's in terms of who was voting. A lot of people were voting, but a lot of people were voting by both parties. And when you're in New Mexico and there's a lot more Democrats than there are Republicans, that's how those elections, you would expect them to turn out. That's just the math. So
yeah, high turnout in New Mexico has never played to Republicans' advantage. They don't have the numbers that Democrats do. So you've got to rely on greater Republican discipline or some swing voters moving into the Republican column. There may have been some of that. There always is, because if Republicans actually performed and Democrats actually performed the way that their voter registration numbers were, it would be a total disaster for Republicans. They'd never win anything. But they had some high points, and Yvette Harrell was the most notable among them. It was pretty frustrating, I think, for those of us who are hoping to see more fiscally conservative, more free market public policies enacted in our state, maybe a rebuke to the governor and her handling of COVID-19. Nothing like that happened remotely. And, we're also, of course, looking at the potential future of our governor leaving to be in a prospective Biden administration. Kind of all over the place. There's so much to think and talk about. But Yvette Harrell did benefit from much stronger Republican turnout, especially in oil and gas patch down in southeast New Mexico. And Speaker Egolf.
I was just going to say, and, Speaker Egolf all but said, don't get too warm and cozy in Washington. Don't necessarily buy an expensive townhouse, because we might be able to redistrict that district where you'll have a hard time winning it in 2 years.
Yeah, and again, that's something I've been talking about for several months, is just based on the numbers. And with those numbers as they stood, CD1, which is the Albuquerque Torrance County district, where Deb Haaland, Michelle Garcia Holmes battled it out. Haaland didn't run a single TV ad and hit 58+% of the vote, which makes us, this district, which I vote in and you do as well, comparable in terms of results to the northern congressional district, which all but 1 year back in the early 90s when Bill Redmond got in there because of a Green Party candidate. That district up in northern part of New Mexico also win about 58% of the Democrats. So the point is there are plenty of votes in both of those congressional districts potentially to spare to make that second congressional district very challenging to win for Yvette Herrell. Now, of course, times change, turnout evolves, and I think this was a very difficult election for Republicans to make headway. They actually made some headway, but I think Democrats need to check themselves because not every election is going to have Donald Trump at the top of the ticket for them to, going back to the 1984, the book, where where not the year, the book, where they have the 5 minutes of hate where people just scream at the screen that they just get to hate that bad character. And to the Democrats in New Mexico and around the country, quite frankly, Donald Trump filled that nefarious characteristic very well in that role of essentially getting out the vote for Democrats. And while I thought Trump was very strong in his performance, both as president and as a candidate, he did also generate significant turnout for the Democratic Party as well, and that really, was the undoing here in New Mexico.
Yeah, and I was surprised how well the Biden campaign did. I think it's a fair statement to say that the Democrats did not like Donald Trump. They don't like anything about him, and I asked many of my Democratic friends what they liked about Biden, and that was really that was really irrelevant. There was
very short discussion,
but the thing they liked the most about Biden, everyone I talked to was he isn't Trump, and so I think he was in my opinion, a weak candidate, much like Kerry and Gore. He had a lot of their same weaknesses without some of their strengths, but it didn't matter because this was Trump or not Trump.
Yep.
And not Trump won. It looks like we'll have to wait and see. So
on the flip side, Trump actually turned out larger numbers of African Americans, both male and female. He turned out significant numbers of Hispanics, Latinos. He turned out a lot of folks for Republicans for himself that that have otherwise not necessarily been willing to vote Republican in the past, and that just is it. Trump is in many ways there's a cult of personality aspect to him, and so you either love him or you hate him. So it's very much a referendum on the president. Now, I will say this: if COVID-19 was not a thing, if it just never happened, I think Trump wins this thing in a landslide. And it also helped Joe Biden because I don't think anybody believes Joe Biden is hale, hearty, and really able to go get it at the same level as President Trump. And being able to kind of let the other guy push the turnout and just kind of guide the whole process, and you hang out in your basement and have these lovely socially distanced events where 10, 20, 30 people show up and stand in their little circles. That COVID virus really played into Joe Biden's strengths in this election.
Yeah, you brought up something that I think was a big story, and that is how well Trump did with African Americans and with Hispanics. And my theory is, in addition to the cult of personality, I think some of them remembered how they were doing economically under Trump before COVID hit. And so I think both of those factors, record low African American unemployment, Hispanic unemployment, and it's almost the meme now is like, I'm old enough to remember before COVID. That wasn't that long ago, and I think some of those voters did remember that.
Yeah. Well, let's just kind of turn this back into New Mexico. And of course, the legislature whether it's more progressive now or less than it was in the last session or the session before that, there are fewer breaks on the legislative initiatives of the governor and the Democratic leadership now than there were before with John Arthur Smith and the moderates gone. So the Democrats have become more progressive, more Democrat. There are more conservatives too. Greg Schmiede's one. He's very conservative. Mark Moores, who was going into this election the most conservative member of the Senate on the Republican side, he won re-election. David Gallegos won down in Hobbs as well. So you have three true blue conservatives there in the state Senate on the Republican side. You just don't have enough numbers. So in my estimation, the state Senate is going to be even more progressive. And that means that with the House really remaining very progressive, marijuana legalization is a done deal. The only question is the terms and where the money goes, et cetera. Tapping the permanent fund is a done deal, and I think Republicans need to, and we will be having these conversations and putting out information, understand, that there are ways to tap the permanent fund that are more beneficial and less than others. Just creating new government programs is not going to be good for the state, but if we can do something for businesses as well, that's something to consider. And then on the flip side of that, do they raise taxes, and if so, how much? And if you raise taxes, that is not going to help the New Mexico economy. It is, of course, they raised taxes in 2019 in $1 billion surplus. So it seems hard to resist the idea that they're going to raise taxes again. But those are three discussion points that I really think are relevant as we move forward to January.
Yeah, I agree with you. And then the other factor that I look at, Paul, is that when you had some moderate Democrats in the Senate that were going to stop what to me was just horrific, crazy legislation coming out of the House, that won't be there. And then I'm wondering whether the House will show more discipline, because it's like this happens in Washington too. If you know what you're proposing will die in the other branch of the legislature, you can put some crazy stuff out there without actually risking it passing if you are just trying to make a point. Well, there may not be that opportunity to have cooler heads prevail. So that's one of the things I will be looking at in the upcoming session, which is a whole nother topic about how will that happen, the Zoom session or whatever we're going to end up calling it. But yeah, with lots of D's on both houses, what has in past times when there's been less influence from one party and one party gets total control, like we have in New Mexico, as strong as it's been in a long, long time, at times there is a more conservative element that almost by necessity raises its head, because deep down they know this is a bridge too far. Will that thought occur to the legislators in Santa Fe? We will wait and see. And then on the marijuana issue, just the point is that I think it'll pass. The other issue is New Mexico tends to pass things like that with lots and lots and lots of rules and lots of regulation and lots of taxes. So we could see legalized marijuana, but with such a horrific system that the illegal market is going to probably thrive more under that system than maybe even it currently does now, something we've seen around the country. So that's something that, again, not necessarily a big issue to me, but from a impact of regulation, we'll see. We could have legalized marijuana and really still have there be a huge benefit to the illegal marijuana trade going forward.
Yeah, well, it's a brand new marketplace for New Mexico, and
well, it's not brand new. And I know some people that maybe have found an alternative marketplace.
Right. My point is that they have the power, theoretically, to create a new market.
Oh,
now,
yes.
You've got Arizona, which also just legalized, Colorado, which has had legalize weed for a while. New Mexico can take, the legislature could take the let's be competitive with these other states or even undercut them slightly on price and make things work to
More
New
the
Mexico's
Colorado model,
favor,
say, yeah.
or they can get greedy and overtax, overregulate, and do all the things that they do to the rest of the economy. And
The
it'll
California model.
yeah, it'll be interesting to see
Yeah, it will.
where things go with that. Of course, other issues. We're talking about mandatory paid sick leave here at Albuquerque at City Council later on. Well, it's going to be introduced at the council meeting, and we're going to potentially see that becoming law, though there's no guarantees. That could be an issue at the state level. Oil and gas industry rules and regulations, what do those look like? And of course, as you said, we're looking at a 60-day legislative session like we've never seen before, presuming that it's not going to be live in person in the Roundhouse. Early reports are that there could be involvement of the Santa Fe Convention Center, which unfortunately the reality is that it doesn't look like individuals, the public, lobbyists, any of those kinds of folks will be allowed to participate in person. So this could be a very opaque, lacking in transparency 60-day legislative session, which it's one thing for that to have happened during the special session back in June. It is a different ball of wax to have a virtual 2021 60-day session. And
because in the special session, it just seemed like the proverbial smoke-filled room was the norm for how, and not saying that they did it that way, but just the way the technology works and doesn't
there
work.
There are no smoke-filled rooms in Santa Fe, Wally. This is, we have banned that unhealthy habit. But
virtual smoke.
Virtual smoke.
Yes.
Yeah. So you're right, though. Yeah. That's kind of way a special session works. They've coordinated everything ahead of times, and they come to some final discussion.
But the technology did not make it more open by any stretch.
No.
It was just one of those. It reminded me not as much of a legislative session as the election of a pope.
Yeah.
The puff of white smoke shows that they have a new pope, and so boy, that does not seem like that would be good. So hopefully they're thinking about some processes to make this more open to the people. And one of the strengths of New Mexico's legislature, its biggest traditionally has been how
very
open it is to the accessible and open during the process.
And we are in the midst of a potential sea change in that, going from very accessible to very non-accessible. And I know that the courts have been so deferential to our governor, and it's one thing to have a special session in a virtual setting. It's another thing to have a full 60-day session. I would hope that there might be another legal challenge to, find out or to push the courts yet again, because anyone who has ever been up there to Santa Fe to lobby, to talk about issues, even just citizen lobbying, it is not a process that translates well to a virtual Zoom environment. Speaking of the COVID-19, we didn't get out of the chute with that one, but the governor did have another meeting, another press conference last week. She noted correctly things are bad, very bad. Death rate is really going up quickly, which is unfortunate. And the infection rate has skyrocketed as well here in New Mexico. It's also doing similar things kind of across the country and even across the world. I was somewhat surprised to see after the governor, or after the election, that the governor did not come out with the sledgehammer and issue all kinds of new regulations and restrictions. But she did very strongly hint, she more than hinted, she stated clearly that if things continue down the path they are on, she will bring the hammer down. But no one knows what that hammer will look like, and we'll know possibly this week, if the governor has a press conference, where things are heading on COVID-19. But it's not a good situation right now.
No, it is not. And then, from a strictly political point of view, does the governor want to be the cabinet secretary for Health and Human Services, or doesn't she? If she does, the lights are bright of the national media in this process. It's one of those things to face the scrutiny of the New Mexico media sometimes is pales. Even if it's a very supportive media to what could happen nationally. And so does that play into it? Of course, politics doesn't play into COVID. Other than politics, seems like it plays into everything in America, everything in New Mexico, all political all the time. But yeah, it will be interesting to see what's happened. And also, if we're going to look at another sort of shutdown outside of the mainstream of what other states are doing, and without things like the Payroll Protection Act and all the things that were available the first time, which frankly the federal government probably can't afford to do more than one or two more times before even the spendthrifts in Washington might realize what they're doing to the currency and what it might mean for the country. So there are a lot of big challenges as COVID ramps up in New Mexico.
Well, the stock market seems to think that there's going to be at least one more big package of relief money thrown out there, and I suspect that they're right. We'll see how many. I assume we're talking trillions of dollars that'll be spent by the Biden administration, and I think Republicans in most cases will be eager to go along with that as long as the Democrats don't put too many special interest provisions in there for their own people that don't get shifted over to Republican states or Republican interest groups. So we'll just see how big that package looks. But yeah, if the Biden administration is looking for a governor that has kind of handled COVID-19 the way that you think Joe Biden might have had he been a governor. Michelle Lujan Grisham has certainly been restrictive and continues to be very hard in terms of the lockdown. She never really opened. I think that's the main difference, is that when things were going pretty darn well, which is pretty much any time in this whole crisis numerically, besides now, it's gotten much, much worse than it was at the beginning or middle or any other time period in COVID-19. But she has remained steadfast and very aggressive. And I'll share with you a brief paragraph or two from the Albuquerque Journal, because this is conflicting. And we've covered UNM athletics. We're not quite at the stage where the Lobos and Aggies are ready to merge, but they might be sharing hotel rooms in Las Vegas at some point here near future. But after Oregon's governor, this is directly from the Journal, last week allowed Portland and Portland State to practice, UNM and NMSU remain as the only two of 357 men's Division I programs, this is basketball, not being allowed to practice due to state jurisdictional health orders. Some have paused practices for positive tests on the team or conference decisions. And then good old Trip Stilnecki, he has called Republicans a death cult when things were going much, much better on the virus. What other states are doing is their business, said Mr. Stelnecki, communication director for Lujan Grisham. I wouldn't say any state in the country right now is an exemplar of keeping people healthy and alive, blah, 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 essentially. So we are, interestingly, home to the only two major college basketball teams that are not allowed to even practice. That's a special number to achieve. And there's, as the article alluded, there's going to be some conflict there. It might be basketball teams residing in Las Vegas. Pretty soon, all New Mexico athletics will be playing their games and residing in, I believe they call it the Pit West during March Madness. It could truly be Pit West for the entire season or some component thereof, or it could be whatever the Aggie. What are the Aggies? You're a graduate. What do they call their?
The Pan Am Center.
Pan Am West.
Yeah, Pan Am West. Yeah. It's interesting when you raised the proposal. that those who don't like to think and cannot take a joke found totally offensive that you proposed the merging of those programs. We talked about it being in TRC or Socorro. So, yeah, this is a good opportunity to, take over floors of a couple hotels, merge them together, just have them stay there. But then when they can come back in a couple years, when the COVID is a distant memory, maybe 1 year they'll play in Las Cruces, 1 year they'll play in Albuquerque. So
Good times, yeah. And, Las Vegas, I guess they have a lot of hotel space available these days because their economy, more than almost any other major city, has been devastated. But just interesting times we're living in here, folks. And just got a few minutes here to wrap up. But yes, mandatory paid sick leave, Albuquerque City Council. It's probably I've looked at this one. It's probably the most polished, well put together. If you're going to do this, this is the kind of thing that you would think may be a final product. And we oppose it. We
and we have so many businesses,
Right.
small businesses in particular in our state that are
Right.
literally, not figuratively, on the cusp of bankruptcy. To
Yes.
throw this in there. And then the other thing I've been thinking a lot about is, they make this out. There are, things have benefits and costs. And would there be some benefits to this to some employees? There's no question about it. But when you have so many businesses on the cusp of bankruptcy, the job losses could pale compared to any benefits for those few people who are low wage earners that don't have a sick leave plan that are out there. And then the other issue is that, there's not a lot of nuance in these. It covers temporary and part-time and teenagers, so if you're a teenager, do you really want a sick leave benefit, or would you just as soon get 50 cents more an hour for the small amount of time you work? A lot of those things aren't taken in there, but I begin and end with the fact that with COVID-19, the fact that small businesses have been so disproportionately hurt and on the cusp of financial ruin and bankruptcy, man, it seems like this is a bad time for this endeavor here in Albuquerque. Oh, and this is depending on how you do it, the third or the fourth bite at the apple. Now, I don't think's the time.
No, absolutely. And that's kind of, that's my general point is that, rarely do we at the Rio Grande Foundation say, we really oppose this policy. It's a bad policy, but the real reason we oppose is not right now. Well, no time is a good time for government to come in and start micromanaging, whether it's wage rates or whether it's benefits. Those are things that should ideally be negotiated between workers and the employees that hire them. Government should largely butt out. And you're right, especially younger people who would rather see more money in their paychecks as opposed to money dedicated to a sick leave plan or whatever it is. Now, it is worth noting, and this is one of the reasons I said it's more polished, is that it would apply here in Albuquerque to 10 or more employees starting in January of 2021, 3 or more employees starting in 2022, January. And that's kind of a little bit of a compromise there. It's not applying quite to the first employee hired, which in past, and they all run together now, but
Right.
there's been so many of these proposals. But in past initiatives around sick leave, that is the kind of thing that's been an issue. Now, I'm not saying that 10 or more employees would be a viable alternative, but I mean, restaurants are really the business that has, as a group, that has 10 or more employees on a pretty consistent basis, but might not have paid sick leave. A lot of other businesses are going to already have that. None of this makes what they're doing right. Once you get down to 3 employees, you're really talking about all businesses, including the very smallest. So,
Yeah, and then I wonder, Paul, where being a independent business person, if we get down to where it applies to everybody. Do I have to provide it for myself if I'm the only employee, even if I don't
Right.
want it, because I don't want to keep track of
Right.
all the mindless details, which just shows there's always unintended consequences of these things as one of the costs that emerges. And this has a lot of costs. So this will be an interesting one. I have a feeling cooler heads will prevail for the short term, but who knows?
I hope as well. And I wrote an article. Well, I did author the piece, but it went out with a lot of other free market business type organizations in the Albuquerque Journal on Saturday under the headline "Paid Sick Time." It's wrong. It's the wrong time for more burdens on businesses. Again, that ran on Saturday in the Albuquerque Journal. You can go read that at errorsofenchantment.com. I believe the Hispano Chamber had something in on Sunday as well. I don't think, and we talked about Terry Cole of the Albuquerque Chamber and her comments, very strongly worded. Sometimes the Albuquerque Chamber takes a very almost too nuanced approach to some of these issues. And in this case, she really, laid it out there and said, this is a terrible idea. We shouldn't do this, especially right now. And I concur with Terry Cole. So last thing I want to cover real quickly is that the 40-day time period upon which budgets are based in public schools, the PED, supposed to get the 40-day enrollment from all the school districts.
Yeah, the
across
40th
state.
day that's when you determine, because they figure they've stayed in school long enough.
Exactly.
That goes back a long time, as I recall.
Yeah, well, we had recently talked to folks in education, and the 40th day was about October the 12th here in New Mexico. We waited and waited and waited some more, and the districts, the PED, still had not provided this 40-day number, and we're wondering when this number will be provided. We put an information request in, and the PED said, no, this information is not available yet. Wait till December. Now, in a normal year, this might not be a very big issue, but we are in a very unusual year when a lot of people are pulling their children out of the traditional schools. This is the kind of number that should be made available in a timely fashion to have that kind of discussion and find out, really, is this online situation, which I believe is failing our kids, how is it performing? How is it holding up? Well, nobody knows, and I write about it at errorsofenchantment.com, and we're going to hopefully find out eventually, but it is very unfortunate, the lack of transparency at the public education department. So that's where we'll leave it, and folks, it was a challenging election. We've just got to hope that kind of the passion remains on the conservative side of things, free market, libertarian side of things, and that the other side gets a little less crazed in their passions, assuming, if he does, that Donald Trump rides off into the sunset. And I mean that I wish he was still our president. I voted for him to be our president, but he, it does not appear that there's a very easy path forward to get him back to the White House. And one of the silver linings of that is that the other side has used him as their whipping boy for the last 4+ years, and their entire passion and get out the vote effort has largely been driven by Trump hatred, and that's certainly made life difficult for us here in New Mexico in terms of trying to change the legislature, change other positions and policymakers. So thanks for listening to this week's show. Make sure to get the latest edition of Tipping Point New Mexico by subscribing to Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, and Spotify. You can post or comment on this and other episodes on Facebook and Twitter, and tell Google Home to play Tipping Point New Mexico. Thanks to Path 3 Marketing for producing this show.